It was one of those bleak, heavy days that creeps up unnoticed and drains you dry before you realize it. Within minutes, the illusion of control I'd clung to shattered completely, leaving behind nothing but chaos. All I could do now was wait, heart pounding, afraid the worst was about to unfold. But I wasn't one to wallow. Despair had never been a luxury I allowed myself. My old sergeant's voice echoed in my head, as it always did in times like these. When everything's falling apart, act. Action is your only weapon. So, even if everything I cared about was falling to pieces, I could at least hold on to one thing: my dignity. And as luck would have it, a tip I received the day before gave me just enough time to prepare. That's how I ended up crouched low in the passenger seat of my friend's car, parked in a dark corner of a run-down motel lot. I'd caught wind of a rumor that my wife was planning to meet someone here today. I kept my eyes fixed on the entrance, nerves coiled tight, waiting for a flash of red. It didn't take long. Her red convertible rolled in, and right behind it, a showy sports car pulled up, driven by the man she'd chosen over me. He parked beside her, exchanged a few brief words, then headed inside to check in. That was my cue. I slipped out of the car and made my way to hers. The passenger door was unlocked. I slid in without a sound. She jumped, startled. "Connor? What are you doing here?" I kept my voice calm and steady, handing her a brown envelope. "Just making a delivery, to my future ex-wife. Have fun with your real man. Don't worry about coming home." Her face went pale as she reached for the envelope, hands shaking. "No, please. You've got it wrong. This isn't what you think. Just listen, Connor. There's no betrayal. Please let me explain." I shook my head. "I'm not here for explanations, Margaret. I want a divorce. I don't care about you or that coward who just went to grab the room key for your little affair. If that's who you want, take him. I'm done." Tears welled up in her eyes, falling freely now. Whatever fantasy she had spun around this man and their secret rendezvous was clearly unraveling. Then he came back. Room key in hand, he approached with a smug grin, until he saw me. His expression morphed into confusion. "Who's this? What did he do to you?" I stepped out of the car without saying a word, reaching into my pocket for a small plastic bottle. Margaret, sobbing, whispered, "This is my husband. And he's leaving me. Because of this." The guy puffed up like a peacock. "Oh, I'll teach him a lesson." He came toward me, fists clenched. "Bad move." Before he could reach me, I sprayed his face with the contents of the bottle, just a mix of shampoo and water, nothing too harmful, but enough to send him reeling. He screamed, stumbling backward, rubbing at his eyes. While he flailed, I pulled out the next piece of my plan, a homemade dart, crude but sharp, with 3 small metal points. I walked up behind him and jabbed it into his backside, deep enough that it would need a doctor to pull it out. He screamed again, louder this time, a combination of pain and humiliation. And there I left him, blinded, staggering, with a dart embedded in him like a mark of disgrace. I didn't say another word. Margaret was still in the passenger seat, crying uncontrollably, her illusion shattered. I turned away, got into my car, and drove off into the dark. Whatever they had planned for that night, it was over. That romantic fantasy, ruined. And for me, that night marked the beginning of a new chapter. My name is Connor Smith. I'm 42 years old, married to Margaret, who just turned 40. We have 2 kids, Emile, who's 12, and Estelle, who's 9. We've been together 2 decades, 16 of those as husband and wife. On the surface, we had the textbook family, 2 kids, a cozy home, and a stable life. But happiness, that was never really part of the picture. In my eyes, most of our marital problems began with her mother. Not in the storybook villain kind of way, but her cruelty was constant, like water slowly eroding stone. From the very first time we met, it was clear I wasn't welcome. Her disdain for me was sharp and unapologetic. It started during what I thought would be a harmless family dinner. I expected small talk and polite smiles. Instead, it felt like a courtroom cross-examination. And when she finally opened her mouth to deliver her verdict, it wasn't subtle. "I don't like your name," she said with a sour expression. "Connor is too common. People from respectable families don't name their kids Connor, or Kenny, or Ronnie, or Molly, or Nellie, or Cindy." I was floored by her bluntness, but what cut deeper than her words was the silence. Margaret didn't say a word in my defense. Neither did her meek father. That was when it hit me. The problem wasn't just between Margaret and me. Her family would always be part of the equation, and they weren't going anywhere. She continued her speech, casually explaining that the name Smith was typically passed down through generations of rural farmers, an implication that my bloodline was beneath hers. Then, without skipping a beat, she turned to Margaret with a sigh of disappointment. "I just expected more for you," she said. "Natalie made the right choice. She's marrying into a noble family." That was my breaking point. I stood up and snapped, "Isn't the father of that nobleman an illegitimate child from a distant branch? And doesn't he live off welfare without a job?" Before anyone could respond, I added, "I need some air." Then I turned to Margaret. "Will you come with me?" To my surprise, she quietly nodded. And together we walked out, leaving behind that suffocating atmosphere and the people who never once treated me like I belonged. I'd known Natalie's fiancé, Alexander, since our school days. His ability to charm people wasn't news to me, so it was no surprise when he managed to win over Margaret's eccentric mother, painting himself as the ideal match for her daughter. He wore his charm like armor, concealing what lay beneath, but honestly, I didn't care. I wasn't even invited to their extravagant wedding, and that was perfectly fine with me. I had no desire to be part of it. All that truly mattered to me was my relationship with Margaret. And over time, our connection grew stronger, maybe a little too fast. That deepening bond led to an unplanned pregnancy, which turned our world upside down. The news sent Margaret's mother into a frenzy. She unleashed her fury over the phone, hurling insults and declaring she wouldn't spend a single cent on our wedding. But her threats didn't matter to us. Instead of begging for approval, we chose intimacy over spectacle. We held a modest ceremony, surrounded only by close friends and a few family members. Soon after tying the knot, both Margaret and I landed excellent jobs in a city more than 30 miles from where we'd grown up. That distance proved to be a blessing. I rarely had to deal with her mother. Meanwhile, Margaret's mother redirected all her attention and energy into Natalie and Alexander, lavishing them with support. Sadly, not long after our wedding, Margaret suffered a miscarriage. It was a heavy blow, but we leaned on each other and made it through together. 3 years later, we were blessed with our son. Then came our daughter. Life finally began to feel whole. With 2 beautiful children, our lives became rich and peaceful. We both earned well, bought a lovely home, and formed a tight-knit circle of friends. The intimacy in our marriage remained strong, and the physical distance from Margaret's family gave us breathing room to grow. Her parents never visited us, and whenever we returned home, I'd spend time with my own folks while Margaret caught up with hers. Eventually, even Alexander grew weary of his demanding mother-in-law. Still, his professional life thrived. When a new opportunity required him to relocate nearly 50 miles away, he jumped at the chance. After several explosive arguments, he gave Natalie a clear choice: move with him or face divorce. She chose to go with him. And with Natalie gone, Margaret's mother suddenly remembered she had another daughter to meddle in. That's when the daily phone calls began. Each one was a storm of complaints. She picked apart everything I did, or didn't do, drawing constant comparisons to the fantasy life she believed Alexander and Natalie were living. These relentless critiques began to seep into our marriage, widening the cracks. I told Margaret the truth as I saw it, that Alexander hadn't moved away for work alone. He'd escaped. He couldn't take her mother's toxicity any longer. But that only sparked more arguments between us. Then came the next complication. A new man started working with Margaret, a distant relative of an old noble family. She became infatuated. She spoke of him constantly, calling him a real man, sometimes even referring to him as Superman. It was obvious she was comparing him to me. He wasn't even single. His wife was a nurse working overseas in Asia, scheduled to return in a few months. They were saving up to buy a house, but for now he lived nearby, renting a room from his sister-in-law. Margaret's admiration for him grew by the day. Meanwhile, everything I did became wrong in her eyes, from how I spoke to how I dressed. According to her, this man did it all better. I didn't stand a chance in her comparisons. Even though our physical intimacy continued, her passion was clearly fading. She began responding with sighs and dismissive remarks like, "Again? Or don't you ever get tired?" If it weren't for our children, and the parts of Margaret I still admired, I might have left already. She was still faithful, still a loving mother, a fantastic cook, and always maintained her appearance. Together, we ran a smooth household and tended to the garden as a team. But her sharp tongue and constant criticisms turned the woman I once adored into someone distant and cold. I wasn't the type to silently endure verbal jabs. I gave as good as I got, and our fights escalated. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, she made another cutting remark. "I wish you were more like my colleague." That was the moment everything boiled over. My anger surged. If you're so obsessed with him, why don't you just run off and be with him? But if you cheat while we're still married, I swear, he won't walk away untouched. And if he's bold enough to make a move, I'll make sure he knows your services won't come for free. Margaret snapped. Her voice was sharp and vicious. "You filthy, pathetic excuse for a man. How dare you say that about me? You'll regret this. I promise." I shot back coldly, "Maybe it's better if he pays instead of you." I shouted in frustration, but before she could unleash more fury, our two terrified children came running into the room, tears in their eyes. Their fear yanked me back to reality. I immediately turned my attention to them, trying to soothe and calm them. After that explosive fight, a heavy silence settled between Margaret and me. For 2 weeks, we barely spoke. On the first weekend, she took the kids to visit her parents. The next weekend, we hosted guests, Natalie and Alexander. While they were with us, Margaret transformed. She acted like the perfect, loving wife, sweet, affectionate, smiling. But as soon as our guests left that Sunday morning, her mask slipped. The moment the front door closed behind them, she looked at me and said with icy finality, "Don't think I'll be doing you any more favors." Things deteriorated quickly after that. By Thursday, I received a strange phone call while at work, from one of Margaret's coworkers. She introduced herself briefly, then jumped straight into a troubling confession. "There's a new guy in the office. Attractive, confident, the kind that draws attention. 3 of us were interested, including your wife." We tried to remind her she's married to a decent man, but she wasn't hearing it. In fact, she's now bragging that she's the one who's won him over. Says they're planning to meet at a motel tomorrow. I thanked her for telling me and asked her to keep the conversation between us. I didn't want a scene. I wanted clarity. And control. That evening, Margaret was unusually chipper. Smiling too easily. Floating around the house like a woman with a secret. My mind kept circling back to that call. I remembered something my old army sergeant used to say. He had a deep respect for the Apaches and their method of silent, swift ambush. They struck without warning and vanished before anyone knew what hit them. Violence wasn't my first instinct, but I understood the power of surprise. Margaret once bragged that her office crush held a black belt in some martial art. That meant direct confrontation wouldn't be wise. I needed to catch him completely off guard. I thought about using pepper spray, but it's illegal here. So, I had to improvise. After some experimenting, I discovered that diluted shampoo, particularly one with menthol, worked surprisingly well when sprayed in the eyes. It wasn't deadly, but it'd blind a person long enough to make a point. That same night, I went down to the basement workshop. Inspired by the sergeant's stories about barbed Apache arrows, I repurposed an old dartboard. I angled sewing needles at the tips of a few darts, creating jagged ends that, if embedded in flesh, would hurt like hell and probably require medical attention to remove. I didn't test them on myself, but I trusted my design. My plan wasn't elaborate. It didn't need to be. I would serve Margaret the divorce papers, blind her lover long enough to disable him, and drive a dart into his backside to seal the memory. I figured once he limped out of that motel room, he'd think twice about pursuing a married woman again. Friday morning arrived like any other. Margaret dressed like she was going out to seduce the world, but I kept my expression neutral. We had our usual breakfast routine, shared a few words, and I went to work like it was any other day. That morning, I swapped cars with my coworker Eric, something we occasionally did when he needed to haul things with my larger vehicle. Then I swung by the courthouse, picked up the divorce paperwork, and filled it out during my break. I also managed to get in touch with the lover's wife through a contact at an international aid group. She was still working abroad but responded quickly when I emailed her the truth. During lunch, I drove by Margaret's office. Both her car and the other man's were parked outside. Clearly, they'd driven separately, likely to avoid suspicion. They must have gone out to eat together and planned to rendezvous afterward. I stopped at a roadside stand, grabbed a couple of hot dogs, and parked across the street from the motel where I suspected they'd go. I waited. Right on schedule, they arrived. My instincts hadn't failed me. The rest unfolded almost exactly the way I'd prepared for. Every tactic I'd learned in the army, the timing, the approach, the mental control, came into play. I didn't even need to raise my voice. The presence alone, the look in my eyes, the message in my hand, was enough. Later that evening, around 5:30, the same colleague who had warned me called again. "Were you at the motel today?" she asked. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I did," I said flatly. Though I don't think Margaret or her co-workers appreciated my visit. I tried to keep things from escalating. Handing her the divorce papers was my version of diplomacy. But her lover didn't take it well. He got physical, aggressive, so I responded in kind. I didn't come to start a war. But I wasn't going to leave like a coward either. Let's just say her so-called soulmate left the motel limping and holding his lower back, and I'm fairly certain Margaret rushed him to the ER herself. I spoke plainly to the woman on the phone. It wasn't quite the romantic escape they had in mind, but yes, everything happened as you heard. There's no benefit for me to invent something like this. Since Margaret still hadn't come home, I suggested she try reaching out directly. "Give her a call," I said. Though I wouldn't count on her being honest about it. She thanked me and asked for Margaret's number. I didn't hesitate to share it. I figured a conversation between the two of them might be long overdue. Then I turned my attention to writing a long, detailed letter to the woman overseas, his wife. I told her everything. The flirtation, the motel, the lies. She deserved to know exactly what kind of man she had married. At 6 p.m. sharp, Margaret walked through the door, her face flushed with fury. She didn't even take off her coat before snapping, "We need to talk. Now." I stayed calm. "Did you and your lover get what you were after?" I asked. "Because if you thought I'd sit back quietly while the two of you made a fool out of me, then you clearly underestimated me." Her expression darkened. "He's in bad shape. I had to drive him to the hospital. You'll pay for that." "No," I said flatly. "We all will. For adults and 2 children will have to deal with the mess you created. And if you're wondering whether his wife overseas took the news well, she didn't. But at least now, she knows the truth about her husband." Margaret's voice cracked. You really sent that letter? That's heartless. What really seemed to unnerve her, though, was the word divorce. She stared at the paperwork like it was a death sentence. I never threatened you, I said quietly. Just sign the papers. 6 months from now, we'll both be free, and I'll make sure the settlement is fair. I warned her that dragging things out with a lawyer would only cost her more, and change nothing. The weight of it finally hit her. Her eyes welled up. You can't be serious. Please, you have to listen to me. I haven't done anything wrong. I cut her off. Yes, you have. You let your overbearing mother poison our marriage because she thinks I'm beneath you. You let her turn you into someone who constantly picked me apart. Then, you latched onto a man you always said was better than me, your real man. I know you competed with your coworkers for him. I know you left the office early. And I know you went to that motel. Her face fell as I continued. You know how I feel about betrayal. There's no gray area here, Margaret. She started sobbing. I swear I didn't cheat. Not really. I love you. What about the kids? They're the only reason I didn't throw you out sooner, I admitted. But every day, you and your mother made me feel small. And now, thanks to you, I have to rebuild from scratch, with scars. She tried to deny it, but she knew it was over. Eventually, we sat down and talked logistics. Margaret signed the divorce documents, but with one condition, that we continue sharing the house for the next 6 months and agree not to date anyone else during that time. 6 weeks passed. Oddly enough, things changed. Margaret started acting like the wife I had once loved. Kind, helpful, attentive. It was like living with a completely different person. Gone was the constant criticism, the coldness. We even started doing things together again, laughing, eating dinner side by side. But we no longer slept in the same room. And honestly, I didn't miss the empty affection she used to offer. Strange as it may sound, I believed her when she said nothing physical happened. I think the motel was supposed to mark the beginning, but they hadn't crossed that line yet. As for her real man, his wife didn't just confront him. She divorced him, took everything and walked away. She even wrote to me later, letting me know he was doing okay and that she had forgiven him. When the 6 months were up, I made my decision. I signed the final documents and ended the marriage. 16 years gone. The hardest part? Only seeing my kids on weekends. But even that didn't last long. One chilly autumn evening, I got a call from the police. Margaret had been pulled over for drunk driving, with the kids in the back seat. That was the final straw. Child Services reviewed the case and granted me full custody. As for Margaret, the woman she used to be was gone. Over the next year, she spiraled, drinking heavily, pushing everyone away. I didn't need to punish her. She did it all by herself. And that's where this story ends. If this story moved you, hit that powerful like button, subscribe for more, and don't forget to ring the bell to stay updated.